With this new extension, it's now possible for virtually anybody to create lightsaber visual effects without ever spending a single penny on software. First things first, we want to delete the default cube and everything else. So just hit A and then delete. Then we will go up here to Edit, Preferences. In the Get Extensions tab, we can go over here and select Allow Online Access, and then simply search Lightsaber. And that should come up with this extension. Then we just hit Install, and now you have the add-on. To find the UI of the add-on, we simply hit N on the keyboard, and it should show up in this add-on panel down here, labeled Lightsaber. The first step is to go ahead and click this button to load in our footage. Find the clip that you're looking for, and then simply click Import. After that, go ahead and select Add Lightsaber, and the scene will be all set up for you. You'll notice that over here in this add-on panel, you have a few different options with some drop-down lists, each one of these containing a different part of this add-on's unique features. If you go over here to Blade Material and Glow, you can edit everything about the look of your lightsaber blade, including how bright you want it to be, saturation, the width of the blade itself, and the glow strength. You can tweak these settings to your heart's content, make it look however you want to, until you get the result that you're looking for. Every time you click this Add Lightsaber button, it will add a new lightsaber rig, which can then be animated individually, just in case you want to have multiple lightsaber blades in your scene. When the lightsaber object is created into the scene, it will come as a lightsaber model, which already has the glowing effect applied to it, and these two handles, which will allow you to move the tip and the base of the lightsaber wherever you want to. As an added feature, under Blade Material and Glow, there's also a presets panel where you can make your own custom presets, and that will save between projects. So anytime you want to create a lightsaber exactly the same as you've had it before, you can go ahead and select the preset you're looking for and just hit this check mark, and it will load that preset into your scene. Once you have the lightsaber set up the way that you feel like you want it to be set up, you can go ahead and minimize this panel and look in the animation panel. In here, you'll find a few different buttons, including an auto keyframe button, a snap to volume button, and a motion blur button. The snap to volume button is only applicable for the 3D Pro Saber mode, which is a separate lightsaber rig that will allow you to do some other things, but we won't go into that in this video. The auto keyframing button will allow you to save the location of these points every time that you move between frames. So for example, if I put these buttons here, I advance a few frames, the lightsaber blade will then track to that animation. If you want, you can also come down here to this button. It's the same thing. This is just for people who didn't know where the auto keyframing button was already. This motion blur tick will actually calculate the blur of the lightsaber blade as it sweeps from side to side or from different directions. This is something that you can dial in however you want to. The calculation of the motion blur will only be accurate after the full rendering process, but it will show a temporary motion blur in the viewport if you select it here. As you can see in the viewport, the blade blurred, but it won't have the actual final quality, so don't worry if it doesn't look fantastic while you're just watching it in the viewport here. To make animation even more simple, there's a button up here simply labeled see-through that will put your blade into an X-ray state so that you can actually see through to the background footage and know exactly where the base and the tip of your lightsaber are. If this is kind of hard to see, I can make the blade a little bit wider and you can see that we're actually seeing through to the background footage so that we can get a more accurate animated result. The process of animating the lightsaber is as simple as simply going to the selected frame, grabbing both parts of the lightsaber, moving them to the desired locations, and then simply advancing 1 or 2 frames and moving those again. Now that I've animated a small portion of this video, we can get to the final step, which is actually rendering this video out. The first thing to note is that the rendering process happens in 2 steps. The first step being rendering out a video pass, which is simply the blade itself. And then the second step is actually setting up Blender to take that blade video back and put it on top of our footage correctly so that everything matches and the video exports correctly. This render combine button will also allow you to run both steps at the same time. I find that having both steps separated out as a secondary option is also helpful so that you can render out the lightsaber blade, see how that process goes, and then continue on to the final render if you like the result. This input field here is simply so that you can determine the location of where you want this lightsaber image sequence to actually be rendered out to. It doesn't matter necessarily where you put this. If you leave it blank, it will just go into a temporary folder that will be deleted later on anyway. So if you just want to create the video and you don't care about having the lightsaber element separately, then no worries, you don't have to put anything there. If I go ahead and hit step 1, it will prompt a little window and I can just hit OK, and Blender will freeze for a little bit. Blender is actually on the back end rendering out these lightsaber images as an image sequence, not as a video file. So this is just simply the process of Blender actually taking what we've added into it and then rendering that back out. As you can see, that went pretty quickly. This will just depend on how powerful your computer is, but for me, it went pretty fast, and obviously there weren't that many images in this short snippet of animation that I completed. You'll notice some funky behavior here. If you move the window of your view, the lightsaber will actually slide around on the screen, kind of funny. Don't worry, this isn't because your computer is breaking. This just has to do with the limitations of Blender's viewport compositor in and of itself. But if I hit play here, you can see that the lightsaber does move and that motion blur is calculated correctly. Let's say, for example, that I wanted the motion blur to actually be bigger or even smaller. All I would have to do to go back and redo that rendering process over again after tweaking some settings is hit this reset render button down here and then go through that process over again. So in this case, I want to make the motion blur quite a bit bigger so we can kind of exaggerate the principle here. Here under motion blur, you can actually change the motion blur amount. Anything going higher will make that motion blur last longer and be wider. And then under quality, you probably want to put that to 10 or above, depending on the hardware of your computer. I find that 20 often produces pretty decent results, and with a decent computer, you won't notice the time difference too much. And now looking at this result, we can see that motion blur is a little bit longer and wider, which is exactly what we were going for. After hitting that button, you can see that we now have this step 2 button that appears underneath step 1. And this is where it will actually be important for you to specify where you want this video to end up. Here in the video export drop-down window, you can see this input field, and this is where the final video will actually be rendered out to. I will quickly select desktop and then just hit accept, and now our video will go to that desktop. In addition, I like to set this to be a video render so that it renders out as one video file. MPEG-4 works perfectly fine. Depending on what operating system you're using, you can select those different specifications. If you're on Windows, MPEG-4 will work perfectly fine. And then down under quality, I like to hit perceptually lossless. Normally it sets to medium. Perceptually lossless will help it not have that compressed look as it renders out. After that, we can simply go up here and then hit step 2, composite, and render final, and wait for that to render out. Again, Blender will pause during the process of rendering. Now that that's rendered out, we can go here on our desktop, find that video file, and give it a watch. That's looking great. So now let's hop back into Blender and we can check out a couple more features that will help us in the process. Back here in Blender, every time I want to go back and make edits to what I've already animated, I always make sure to hit this reset render button. That will simply set us back to where we were before we rendered anything out. If we go a little bit further along in this video here, you'll notice that at a certain point in this video, the lightsaber blade itself will actually cross behind my back. Now, of course, if this were filmed for real, you actually would see the lightsaber passing behind my body. Unfortunately, as is with lots of visual effects, it always just goes on top of everything. How do we fix that? Well, there's a few different options. If you render out that lightsaber blade as an image sequence, you can actually take that and composite it in your compositor of choice. However, if you're not really sure how to use any other type of compositor, or you don't have any experience in any of those, or if you just feel like it's kind of clunky to go back and forth between softwares, there is a quick and dirty version that you can use here directly in the add-on. This will actually have to do with our final dropdown, which is the masking dropdown. Here we have our lightsaber blade crossing behind my back. In this scenario, the best thing to do is simply animate the lightsaber where you think it is behind the subject. We can do this quick and dirty. And then we need a way to actually put myself, the subject, back in front of that lightsaber blade. The best thing to do with this add-on is go to the first frame where that lightsaber is actually going behind your subject. In this case, that would be this frame, and then just hit this create mask button. What this is actually doing is creating an image plane with the texture of the video right up next to the 3D camera. Because this is all happening in 3-dimensional space, that lightsaber rig is actually further back, and this image will block that out. What we need to do is actually take this knife tool, which is selected automatically, and just start clicking to draw an outline of our subject. This process can be a bit tedious and clunky. Depending on how fast that lightsaber is actually moving, you can do more or less detail, and you can usually get away with not too many points tracing out your subject, simply because that lightsaber is moving fast. The audience won't notice. Once you're done, you connect that dot and hit enter, and that will turn this image plane into a few different sections depending on what your shape looks like. In this case, it put it into 3 different shapes, and now I simply need to take this. If you can't select the faces, you need to go up here and put it into face selection mode. And this is where this gets a little bit tricky and janky. There should actually be a little dot somewhere on these planes. If you have it in see-through mode like I have it here, it's going to be pretty difficult to go and find those little dots, especially since they're trying to move to the center of mass of that plane, and so they won't even necessarily be in the middle of this plane here. The best thing to do is simply turn off see-through mode and then go up here to the viewport shading view, and then you can actually select those faces a little bit easier. Once you select those, you can hold down shift to select both of those faces, hit the X key, and then simply delete faces right here. What that does is it creates a plane in front of our lightsaber object that only exists for that frame. That way, if your subject is moving like I am here, you can create individual masks for each of those frames. So let's go ahead and create the rest of those masks. As an important side note, while you're creating masks for your subject, remember that that blade is actually going to be quite a bit longer and deeper than just the blade size itself when you see it stationary in the viewport because of motion blur. So you'll actually have to calculate that into the shot in order to make sure that you aren't getting the lightsaber peeking out from under the mask right here. Going back to the regular viewport, we can now see that that lightsaber is hidden correctly behind the subject of the video. This was more just a simple overview of some of the features that this add-on provides, and I hope that you get some use out of this add-on and you can go create an awesome Star Wars fan film. See you later, guys.